You're listening to Second Cut. This is an independent movie podcast where we talk about general things to do with the film industry, any ideas or interesting thoughts that come into our heads at the time. I'm Sam. I'm the one who wrote my undergraduate dissertation on Bong Joon-ho.
I'm Kieran. I'm the one with a shoe on my head.
Yes, and
I,
I'm
don't-
sure,
I,
and I'm sure it's a metaphor everyone remembers from Snowpiercer.
I was going to say it's so metaphorical. Admittedly, when I was rewatching it for this, like there was a lot I'd forgotten. But when I think of Snowpiercer, I do think of Tilda Swinton and a big long discussion about being a shoe.
Yes.
That is what I think of.
I mean, my main thought of Tilda Swinton, now I've heard another interview with Bong Joon-ho, is that she introduced him to the concept of a Yorkshire accent. She said, I feel this would work really well for this character.
And he was like, I can't understand English at the best of times, let
Yes,
alone in a
so
very thick
I'll
Yorkshire.
trust you. Yeah. I mean,
Well,
apparently Robert Pattinson completely lied to him about doing a Pittsburgh accent for Mickey in Mickey 17.
and I expect him to lie about a lot of things in order to get to vote with Bong Joon-ho. Although that is the amazing thing about Bong Joon-ho, in that sort of he did kind of the four kind of Korean films originally: Barking Dogs Don't Bite,
Yeah.
Memories of Murder, Host, and then Mother. And then
Mm.
after that, it's actually quite rare for a kind of non-English or Anglophonic director to have done only sort of three or four films, and after that, it's just people in Hollywood actually want to work on a project specifically because they're
Yeah.
directing it.
Yeah,
Uh,
queuing round the block to work with them very
yeah,
much. So
and I'm
yeah,
sorry, I'm gonna take the shoe off my head now. This is
yeah.
put it
Yeah,
back on my foot.
I mean, obviously, we're discussing him. Obviously, he's one of the kind of the biggest, most important directors out there at the minute. But basically, he's got a new film out. Mickey 17's come out this week, and
Finally,
finally, yeah, after more than a year of delays, mostly due to the strike and wanting to have Pattinson on the promotional trail. But yeah, we've both seen it. We've both written something on it. So
yeah.
check
I
that
was gonna
out
say
on the
it's I,
Substack.
but he must have been kind of thinking about it for a while because the book only came out in
Yeah,
2022, I would say. So
yeah,
it
yeah.
was after Parasite. He must have been like, "Oh, what do I do for a while?" And then kind of, I don't know how he came across Mickey Seven because it's published by, oh, is it Solaris that does it? I'll run and grab my copy in a second.
Mm.
But it's not like one of the big sci-fi
Yeah,
publishers. Edward
yeah,
Ashton had done maybe two novels before that, so it wasn't like it
mm,
was kind of, for example, somebody like Paul Tremblay, when he came through and Shyamalan picked up Camera at the End of the World for Knock at the Cabin. I mean,
yeah,
he'd done sort of four or five books with Titan Books, who are kind of one of the bigger spec fiction publishers, and Tremblay had got two or three Stoker Awards by that point. So he was an established name for picking up like a first adaptation of a kind of genre fiction book. So I've no idea how Bong Joon-ho
well,
came across this book and then within like weeks went, "We're going to greenlight this and
yeah.
do."
Yeah, I mean, basically after Parasite, I think he was just absolutely exhausted, completely drained of energy after that kind of
Yeah.
just like another year's worth of doing festivals and award ceremonies and everything. And I think when he got out of the system, he had a bit of a rest. He had basically a year off, and
I was
then
going to
I
say,
think
I hope he just went fishing for a bit, you know?
yeah, yeah, and then it was Plan B. Brad Pitt's production company, I think, came to him with Mickey Seven
Oh, okay.
as a possible project for him. And as you say, basically, yeah, well, yep, that sounds just like me. That's well in my wheelhouse. It's about social justice and inequality, and plenty of opportunities to get my dark, twisted sense of humor in there as well.
And plenty of opportunities to go down with the system, essentially.
Exactly.
It's like
Yeah.
in pretty much all of his films, you can find a down with the system or kind of the system is
Yeah.
inept in some way
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
in there.
Those two kind of metaphors, I suppose, kind of suffuse like his whole filmography. Yeah, it's class inequality, social justice kind of stuff, and it's the kind of the unique tone of the thing. Like something that can be really dark and twisted, but also really funny as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh, and I think
unless a filmmaker wouldn't be able to make police torture kind of funny,
yeah.
but he manages it.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we did was it Sweary back about a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit
Yeah.
longer ago, which
Yeah.
was kind of Korea's big
Yeah,
blockbuster in a way.
it's considered the breakout film to kind of get Korean films noticed again in the West. I mean, obviously they had a golden age back in the 60s, but yeah, kind of in terms of like later 20th, early 21st century, that was considered the one to kind of get the country's film industry a bit of attention and kickstart the careers of all these kind of young talented kind of auteurs, like Bong Joon-ho, like Park Chan-wook, like Kim Ji-woon.
And it is interesting that you kind of go on a bit of a rabbit hole and you go kind of look at various people's filmographies. It's like, oh, they've been with this director and this director. You look at that film, it's like also starred with this person who's been with this person and this person. It's quite a tight knit kind of community where they kind of borrow actors and actors.
I mean, it's a relatively small country, isn't it? And a relatively small film industry, though. Obviously, they've got the infrastructure there. They're very much a big player in terms of kind of the kinds of projects they can mount, but in terms of like the number of people to work on them, there's only so many you can share between projects, I suppose.
It's a bit like a kind of British TV industry, for me and Sam will know very much that it kind of there are certain people, and if you're kind of going up the rungs in kind of British film and TV, you've worked on, there's like a couple of franchises that you will have worked on going back the years, like Doctor Who, Harry Potter, Hammer, kind of EastEnders at some point, or Coronation Street. Maybe if you're in the kind of 50s and 60s, Carry On, and even kind of the cast and crew. It's just like you'll go, it's like, oh yeah, my dad was in makeup on like 3 of the Carry On films, and then it's like, oh yeah, it's like my mother was working in costumes for 2 of the Hammer films, and now their daughter is acting in Coronation Street, and it all kind of, it's very interlinked along those lines.
And I guess the stage now with the Brits where it's like they're not, most people who worked in those original run of projects are gone now, but it's like it's their it's their children, their nieces and nephews, kind of carry on with it.
Well, I mean, I remember seeing an interview with Daniel Radcliffe about The Woman in Black, and I think he was saying that kind of the person doing his makeup, I think their mother had worked on the earlier Hammer films. And now it seems a lot like in South Korea, especially, I'm going to say, the kind of darker genre film side. So either your kind of your thrillers, your horror, your sci-fi, kind of those things. That also, they seem to switch very quickly to romantic comedy TV. Those are the two sides, and it seems a very similar principle that's happening there.
Yeah. So a bit of background on director Bong. I mean, he was born in 1969, and very much part of that generation where it's almost like a film brat generation, a bit like you had with the kind of in the US, like the New Hollywood kind of era, but kind of one generation on, basically. So he grew up kind of loving movies and went to film school, and basically all these guys who came up in the early 90s, and got their did like their early thesis works and got their kind of practice in in the industry around then, and then they generally all broke through like the late 90s. Is very influenced by big Hollywood directors, like Hitchcock and David Fincher and a few others. Other ones he's kind of key ones he's referenced, which you could definitely see both of them in his work.
I think I saw a little clip of an interview with him recently where somebody was like, when did you know that you wanted to be a director? And he went, 9 years old. 9's like, I saw Psycho. And at that point, I was slightly traumatized, but at that point, I knew I wanted to be a film director. Which then you look at his stuff and you go, yeah, we can see it.
Of course, it's easy to forget that after World War II and obviously into the 50s, with the aftermath of World War II and then into the Korean War, there was a lot of there were obviously American military bases, in South Korea, and a lot of that kind of culture came over, and basically a lot of kids are around there, and then the subsequent generation obviously grew up with that American culture being very much part of their lives, like the old Hollywood films being on TV and stuff like that. So.
I mean, even MASH was set in Korean War, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So his first feature film was Barking Dogs Never Bite, which I must admit is the only one of his films I've only seen the once, and it's the one that I kind of it's interesting, definitely, but it doesn't
Yeah.
exactly bowl me over, like the
Yeah.
others, really.
You can see that
It's quite.
everything's there, but it's not
He's
quite
just, yeah,
coalesced yet.
he's just, yeah, he's trying stuff out, isn't he? It's kind of he's experimenting with what works and what doesn't. I mean, it's very much just like the opening scene is straight in there with it's kind of twisted kind of sense of humor. It's just a guy going up onto the roof of of the apartment block and chucking a small dog off,
Yeah.
and a small noisy dog off a roof.
I mean, it's interesting because there is very much kind of there's sections which are pure, actually Edgar Allan Poe. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
especially something like The Black Cat, or a little bit of Cask of Amontillado, kind of bricking somebody up
Yeah.
in the walls and still hearing kind of the animals going, and these kind of tales being told down in the
Yeah.
basement, the ghost
Yeah.
stories,
Yeah, and the stuff that obviously he'd come back to with Parasite, and they're like this kind of almost subterranean kind of underclass kind of thing going on, because as you say, everything happens in the basement. It's almost like another little world, like a portal to hell almost. So he does come back to these kind of themes time and time again. And then a few years later, he truly hit the big time with Memories of Murder.
Which manages to do like Korean kind of, I'm going to say, cop films.
Yes.
Have either one of two types of cop. They're either the kind of bumbling sort of, oh, I don't know what to do, that
Yeah.
kind of cop, or
Yeah.
they are like Jet Li. You don't have an in between. You don't have a regular
Yeah.
cop. They're either kind of, I don't know what to do. What the hell are you doing? Shut up. That kind of slightly grumpy, bumbling,
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
incompetent, or they are full-on action hero,
Yeah.
kind of like parkour, everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from like the attitudes to authorities in Korea, and obviously we've seen it in like the last few months, with like the president, trying to declare martial law and getting kicked out for that, and that goes back to the period when Memories of Murder is set in the 80s, when the country was still under a military dictatorship, and very much this distrust of authorities, and they don't know what they're doing. They're corrupt, and leading the country down a dark path.
Yeah.
And it's all about like maintaining power, or just appearing to be able to do the job when they're completely incompetent.
Well, I mean, the one thing that kind of Swiri uses, but I don't think Bong Joon-ho has actually touched upon yet, is the fact that you do have North Korea right next to it.
I'll be fascinated to see what his take on the North-South divide kind of is. I mean, just obviously it'll be such a key aspect to every kind of Korean's like day to day. It's going to be, families torn apart, and culture split, and kind of always been on kind of the edge of that kind of on the edge of your minds, about like could be days from war and everything. I mean, they're still technically at war. The Korean War hasn't ended. It's just it's like a permanent semi-permanent ceasefire at the minute, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the one thing actually that I don't think we discussed when we did Nosferatu, in terms of I don't really even think I thought to think into it when we did Herzog's. The fact that that was being created, and we just said it's a German film when actually it was a West German film.
True, yeah.
And the whole, and obviously one of the key famous lines from Dracula is we were leaving the West and entering the East, and we kind of did not touch on the fact that Germany was not a country at that point. So just thinking of something like that, we didn't even think to kind of go into it. I think obviously because we've all three of us have grown up in a time when Germany was Germany. None of us were born 89 or before. But obviously if you were and you grew up in the 70s or the 80s, the idea of Germany is fairly strange because you'd have grown up at the time when there were two countries. And so I think probably I keep forgetting that it's not just Korea. There is another Korea up there, a bit kind of like almost Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, in that even if you don't make anything that's kind of specifically on the nose, there's probably something in there that we're just lacking the cultural reference points to understand that is going to be kind of feeding off the tension that's there. I don't think Bong Joon-ho has specifically done anything on that. I can't remember any references around that, but it would be interesting to perhaps do some research and find out if anything's touched upon that.
If it's political commentary, it tends to either be inward looking on kind of these are our issues with our identity and distrust of our own officials, or it's distrust towards American kind of influence. Basically, that's his two modes of kind of political commentary generally.
Looking into the host or Okja, especially. I think it's. I did have a point there. I completely lost it. I'll come back to it. You know when you just have an idea for a comment that bleeds across, and then within a second you're like, oh, it's gone. I'll come back to it at some point.
So Memories of Murder, it's a real essentially, so it's a real police investigation into the gruesome Hwasong serial murders committed between 86 and 91. Interestingly, when this film was released, those murders were unsolved, but in the years since, it now has been solved. So
it's so weird to think like that, because you watch this and you kind of, even though it's now been solved, I link it in with something, especially like a couple of years after this, Zodiac came out.
And Fincher has very much acknowledged that link. He says he was very much influenced by this film, and he wanted to go for that kind of telling of a story.
Yeah, and I even think of The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the original one, again, based on unsolved murders. And then I guess anything that's to do with Jack the Ripper, because Jack the Ripper was unsolved as well. So the idea of having a kind of crime thriller where the murders are unsolved at the end is always an interesting one, especially if it's based on a true thing.
Yeah, because the first time I watched this was at university. I was so grateful for one of my lecturers introducing me to him as a filmmaker. I mean, I think I probably had seen The Host on DVD when it came out, but I didn't link that it was like the same guy who did this. But then we watched this, one of our kind of focus films. And one of my friends, one of my housemates, who was also on the course with me, said he found it really unsatisfying. There was no like answer at the end. It was left so open ended. But I said to him, like, but if it's based on a real story, if like a lot of these people who remember these events and are relatives of the victims are still alive, how could you make up a concrete answer? That would be completely dishonest.
Yeah, I mean, people have made up answers before. Very famously, Edgar Allan Poe. Was it Purloined Letter or Mystery of Mary Roger? It's one of his Dupin, Auguste Dupin stories, which started with Murders in the Rue Morgue. I can't remember which one the other ones it is. He was kind of basing it on a kind of investigation that was going on at the time. And when he came to write the conclusion, they hadn't solved the crime yet. So he just had to make up an ending. So everyone's gone, this is really unsatisfactory. It's like, because he was going on stuff that was happening at the time and then had to come up with something, which is obviously not how it worked out. So you can do it, but it's always tricky. It's probably never going to be incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, I mean the whole point about this, obviously, a spoiler at the end. Yeah, obviously the killer isn't caught. There are several suspects, and he kind of sort of he leaves it open to interpretation. It could be one of those, but it might not be. And like the final scene of the film which has Detective Park, looking down the barrel of the camera, and the whole point of that is because he goes back to the site of the original killing, and a little girl standby tells him another man was looking in the drainage pipe, earlier that same day. So he smiles. Oh, she's seen the killer. He returned to the scene of his crime. He asks her, what's he look like? And she goes, oh, just ordinary looking. And he looks out straight down the camera. And Bong's theory about kind of idea about that shot is the character Park is looking out to the audience, and in the audience could be the killer. He could be looking right at the actual guy who did the crimes. Obviously, we now know that he'd already been caught at that point, but he was already serving a life sentence for an unrelated murder, not part of this spree of killings. He'd apparently murdered his sister-in-law, I think, and been tried for that. And then while in prison, he eventually admitted to, and I was also the serial killer from this.
Well, that was how the Scream was inspired by a series of killings that they called the Gainsborough Ripper. And random funny link, if anyone remembers the YouTube series Llamas with Hats, In the first one, there's a dead body in the house of the two llamas, and Carl said he stabbed him 37 times in the chest, and that's specifically a reference to how many times one of the victims for the Gainsborough Ripper's killing
Yeah,
was stabbed. Slightly morbid, and people are going to go, "That's such in bad taste. How dare you?" But like, I don't know the
yeah,
specifics. And essentially, they'd got little bits of they got a lot of little bits of evidence for the Gainsborough Ripper, but they essentially arrested the guy on another charge, and he was in
yeah,
prison for like 3 years. And during those 3 years, they'd found some evidence that they just hadn't got through yet. And
yeah,
eventually, when they got through it, they went, "Hang on, this is a guy. This is why they stopped, because we've arrested the guy for something
yeah,
completely unrelated and haven't made the connection because it's just somebody else that we've randomly picked up." So the
mm,
stuff does happen. It's
yeah.
very weird and very strange on that point.
Yeah. So the Bond kind of retells this kind of true crime story basically by we follow like three mismatched detectives. So it's quite a common trope, isn't it? You know, like different policing styles kind of not really kind of
Yeah.
gelling well together. So you have Detective Parker, played by Song Kang-ho. He's sort of an instinctual, kind of old-fashioned cop, but he's prone to jumping to bizarre conclusions, and he's the most he's like quite carnish kind of character really. You have a Detective Cho played by Kim Roha, who's the sadist of the group, and he'll just resort to violence and police torch, as the first resort. And then Detective So, played by Kim Sang Kyung, who's newly arrived from Seoul, and he's like the city cop, with like used to more kind of up to date kind of policing techniques, and it's more keen to go by the book and rely on technology and stuff like that. Um,
And
and
I
they kind of under pressure from their superiors and the press, and obviously the bodies are kind of mounting up. They seem to appear every time it rains. The killer seems to be going for women walking alone and wearing red out in rainstorms. Essentially, is what they work out. But yeah, they go in this rabbit hole of like harebrained schemes and just trying to make kind of the little evidence they do have kind of fits where it really shouldn't. And essentially, they're running out of time and resort to fabrication, and it just gets kind of worse and worse from there.
Yeah, it's funny because the main character in this, played by yeah, him, name I can't remember. Say it.
Detective Park, played by Song Kang Ho. Yeah,
That's the name I'm remembering. Yeah, who will essentially be in about half of
yeah,
Bong Joon-ho's filmography. Sorry,
yeah,
just the name would completely slip my radar. He reminds me very much, and I'm going to bring this up several times. One of my favorite films of all time is The Wailing, and there's the bumbling kind of
yeah,
policeman attitude. He's a little bit better than Jung-gu is in The Wailing, played by Kwak Do-won. But there's still a kind of "what do you think you're doing over there" kind of thing. It's like blah 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 blah. It's got a
yeah,
kind of almost a kind of jowly kind of blah, 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 that kind
yeah,
of feel to him.
yeah,
And then as I was watching, I'm kind of finding it hilarious because I'm looking back, and then because when we get to it, just whilst I'm on the Wailing, two of the main people in the Wailing, Jungkook and then the woman in white. Both appear. So the main character in The Wailing is played by Kwak Do-won, and then the woman in white is played by Chun Woo-hee, and they are both in Mother as well.
mm,
So there's there's that link as well.
yeah,
And the more I think about it, the more I think that the kind of Jung-goo's character, the main character in The Wailing, is probably, I think, memories of murder after a certain amount of time in Korea. If you're making some kind of police detective thing, you have to acknowledge it or move away from it in some way, and you have to draw a
mm,
line because it became
yeah.
such a kind of touchstone point for
Yeah.
any
This
kind of
is
crime
this
thriller.
is seen as like the definitive. I mean, often voted the best. Obviously, this was pre-Parasite. It's been just see whether that's changed, but for a long time, this was often voted like the greatest Korean film of the 21st century and probably in the
Yeah.
top 10 of all time. Um, Along with films like Brotherhood and I think
Old
Shiri was
Boy.
off not there, an Old Boy. Yeah. Um, And you can kind of see why. I think he kind of handles this kind of very traumatic a series of events from like the country's fairly recent past, and quite obviously, yeah, there is kind of humor to it. There's like, and it's like obviously the police made it look foolish, and some of their ideas are absolutely just bizarre, and just don't help matters at all. It's like or I'm going to go. I'm going to go to a sauna and look out if there's see if there's any hairless men because they're not leaving any evidence on the rape victims. It's just stuff like that, and go to a shaman, to for a
Yeah.
charm, that there's like the dirt from the crime scene mixed with some ink will make up the face of the killer.
Yeah.
But it's all feeds back to that idea that kind of criticizing the authorities and the system of the time. I mean, quite a few times in this film, you see kind of break-offs. It's like you'll hear like air raid sirens going and like people being kind of hurried indoors, curfew, and that's obviously it's like when like military drills are going on. Like, so it was still kind of under martial law at the time of the country. So, and a lot of that is kind of generally implied is affecting the investigations. They're off the streets, when they should be out, and the killer's probably out, committing his crimes.
One of the things I always find interesting on this, and again, this feeds again to the Wailing, purely because that's probably the
Yeah,
Korean kind of film that I've seen enough times that I can
yeah,
feed off this one from. So apologies for continuously bringing up a film that's not
mm,
Bong Joon-ho.
yeah,
But it's the fact that he kind of will criticize almost, and I don't want to use the term social commentary because I always think that makes me sound like a first year film student, that you kind of use that for a bit to make it sound clever and then very quickly move away from it because it actually means nothing. But in his kind of critique of kind of social institutions or kind of things like that, very often he will kind of attack the institution as a whole, but then he'll
yeah,
humanize the individual. Um,
yeah,
there are some times where he doesn't do that, Mickey 17 being one of them,
yeah,
when there's a clearly obvious kind of moron at the top. But normally they're
yeah,
not the main character, and normally if there is a main character in these institutions, they are normally slightly bumbling and slightly just a
yeah,
normal person, and therefore it's
yeah,
kind of humanizing them in a way so that kind of look, there may be people in this
yeah.
situation, but they're also just trying to make a
Yeah,
living. It's
yeah.
just
I mean, you're straight on their side, like from the off, aren't you? I mean,
yeah,
just the scene of them setting up their first kind of crime scene, and every kind of new forensics person or cop who arrives ends up tumbling down that grassy bank,
yeah,
and then like a trucks, driving straight over like a footprint and
yeah.
stuff like that. It's just it's ineptitude, but it's not for lack of trying. It's just they've got the wrong idea about kind of where to focus their resources and stuff
Well,
like
they've,
that.
they've kind of got the wrong idea, and they obviously do not have the resources. I mean, you look at the
No,
police station in there, it's completely kind of grey and bland, probably
yeah,
about 50 years old at that point, made out of the
yeah,
worst concrete you could find, probably like
yeah,
a bunker during the wars that they've
yeah,
refurbished into a thing.
yeah,
So even when you get these kind of weird torture scenes, kind of in a way, kind of
yeah,
interrogations going
yeah,
on for about
yeah,
3 days, you're
yeah.
still on their side
I
because they're
know,
so
and
bumbling.
yeah, and literally, they kind of that they're torturing this poor, this poor handicapped kid who they're trying to pin the blame on, because he's just easy to manipulate, and you have Detective Joe with these big stumpy military boots, who puts like a little kind of flowery kind of sock on it, so it doesn't
Yeah.
leave a mark. And then like after like quite a brutal round of police torture, they'll just stop and eat some noodles and watch like a daytime cop show,
Yeah.
with their interrogation victim.
And you kind of do go, well, like maybe if they did have kind of, there's an obvious thing that they're probably just not very well trained
Yeah,
and trying to do what they can with not very much. So the fact that they are still kind of as much as they can putting themselves in danger, staking out
yeah,
potential serial killers in the middle of the night,
yeah.
and they're not incredibly fit athletes, they're
No,
not
no.
Jet Li, they are
I,
kind of
I mean, there is a great foot chase in this. Compare it to like, like someone's on like films like Point Break. Except as you say, they're inept. They're not that physically
yeah.
fit, and they're outpaced by this pervert, essentially. Who's just
I mean,
having some fun in the fields, and then they're losing him down back alleys and stuff.
yeah, and they get there and it's just like, oh damn, he's fast, you know.
Yeah.
It's just like, and that's the other thing I love about I'm going to like say Korean filmmaking in
Yeah.
general, which is a very bad thing because essentially what happens is because we are in an Anglosphere, normally
Yes.
the Korean or kind of non-Anglophonic films that we see are the good ones. I'm sure in a lot of South Korean filmmaking, in the nicest way, there's going to be some absolute stinkers out there. This is just
Yes.
how it works, you know, the balance
Yeah.
of probability. I think probably, and just kind of if you're not familiar with it, kind of the ones that you know are the ones that people recommend. People don't recommend
Yeah.
the crap ones.
Yeah.
The crap films that we recommend are just we're scrolling through Netflix and see one and go, "Well, that was awful." But in the kind of South Korean filmmaking that I have seen, which admittedly is mostly kind of 21st century
Yeah.
crime thrillers, action thrillers, those kinds of things. One of the things they managed to do far better than 99% of, I'm going to again generalize and say modern Hollywood blockbuster
Yeah.
system films, which is again a gross generalization. But they managed to get comedy and absolute nail biting tension somehow within 3 seconds of each other and it work and it not seem forced somehow. I don't know how it's done. Maybe it's because it's not just the comedy is one liners, you know, and there's a almost, I'm gonna say, you can hear, and I'm going to just say, let's imagine a Marvel trailer. You know the kind of setup, the punchlines they're going to put in this trailer. And I think all comedy feels like this, especially in kind of modern, again, generalizing modern Hollywood blockbusters, that you kind of have a line, somebody quips in, da, 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 cut to next bit, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That very much doesn't happen in these films.
No. Now, all the humor that comes out of like the social situation feels very organic and kind of off the cuff,
Yeah.
doesn't it? I'm sure it's scripted, but they managed to make it feel kind of spontaneous.
And I think it's because, again, a lot of them are just generally socially inept and just
Yeah.
bumbling along trying to make do.
Yeah, I mean, about the only cop that does good work. I mean, I suppose Detective So is trying his best, you know, but it's just he's kind of the system's fighting back against him almost. You know, it's like it's not got the resource he had in Seoul, and there's only so much you can do with this like kind of countryside police force. About the only person who does actually good work and kind of make strides and kind of allows them to progress their investigation is the one female cop on the team. You know, she has she notices that, you know, this one song always plays on the radio when the murders happen. She puts it together, you know, about, you know, what the victims are wearing and the kind of targets this guy has, you know. So, but they just completely dismiss, you know, being typical like patriarchal society in the 80s. You know, they're like, oh, what. I'm going to do a bit of an informal thing for, like a Brits. If you're going to be patronising and you're British, you say, "Oh, well done, love." Yeah, well done.
Yeah,
they're not quite saying "get the kettle on," you know, but they're basically saying that. You know, they don't take seriously at all when, you know, she's the only one who's making any real progress.
and this is when I was flicking through the wiki, just looking up things. I haven't got the original quote or where it's from because it's from I think in the middle of a book or something like that. Okay, there is an opinion article. I haven't read it through, which shows my complete lack of research because I'm going to read from Wiki, but there is a link to a specific article which is they got it from the Korea Times, and it's essentially a Professor Korean Studies, David Tizard, has pointed to Bong's use of the abyss in his movies, seeing it evident in Memories of Murder, Mother, and Parasite. And he points to the train tunnel in Memories of Murder, and he describes it as a dark blackness that stands unapologetically in his films, a space devoid of light, both psychological and physical. He goes to the train in Memories of Murder, the alley in Mother, and the basement in Parasite. That darkness is the host of that which we do not want to see. It is our shadow as both individuals and a species. And again, you've got some like slightly funny moments, and then you have these moments of just absolute objective blackness. And I think with a film like this, when you're basing it off a string of unsolved murders, you do have a shadow hanging over the entire thing. So you would have this, and it's very interesting that kind of crop up.
Yeah, it's like a race against time and a fight against their own ineptitude. But yeah, it's this darkness, this kind of oncoming kind of void is just always reaching out for them and dragging them back. I mean, and to have it, at the end of So being, the most straight arrow of them all, wanted to do it by procedure. For him to get so frustrated by the lack of efficiency of the system, to drag one of the suspects that he's convinced is the murderer to this tunnel and almost shoot him, in cold
Yeah.
blood. That's kind of sums up kind of how far they've come, and for Park to be the one to drag him back and stop this.
Which, considering Bong Joon-ho has done a couple of fairly light films in his filmography. I mean, Barking Dogs. Is it Don't Bite or Never Bite? I've seen both.
I think Never Bite is the more common translation, I think.
Because I've got in my head Barking Dogs Don't Bite. But it's roughly the same thing. That's more of a kind of a black comedy. You get to Okja, that is a kind of science fantasy adventure film. Obviously, Mickey 17 is a kind of sci-fi comedy, satirical comedy. So he does have these lighter moments.
Yeah, The Host is a dysfunctional family comedy crossed with kaiju film, So.
Yeah. So it's very interesting that he kind of does mix and match. He has areas that he'll go back to and fall on. Kind of crime thriller is definitely one of them.
I mean, going back to my going back to my undergraduate dissertation. I mean, I titled it. What was my title again? To what extent do Bong Joon-ho's films reflect a South Korean identity crisis through his representation of the family? And my focus films were Memories of Murder, The Host, and Mother. So patriarchal dominance and the broken Korean family in Memories of Murder, patriarchal breakdown, dysfunctional Korean family in The Host, and matriarchal dominance and the monstrous Korean family in Mother.
Well, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, for Bong Joon-ho, if you're talking about the Korean films, he doesn't do another one for 10 years before Parasite, does he? After Mother, so
yeah, exactly, yeah. So yeah, I think this is the one to kind of to see. There's a reason why this one is kind of held above all the others, except probably Parasite now. I just think it's got the most to it. I think he's generally excising kind of a lot of kind of hurt and kind of general, national trauma, but kind of presenting like the kind of the story in like a really entertaining way and kind of thought-provoking way. I think it's a really good showcase, for all the actors' skills and for the way to tell this really, really difficult kind of ambiguous story. So, and it looks fantastic, and it's such a gorgeous looking film. So following on from Memories of Murder, next to The Host. So it's big old monster movie with this squabbling family trying to work their way through Seoul, basically as this big lizard fish newt thing kind of rampages and basically the whole city is quarantined by the American-backed military forces, essentially.
And the return of Song Kang-ho, obviously.
As like a completely inept father, and
he does it quite well.
Definitely. It's a good comic role for him. A great example of that, of his kind of dark comic sensibilities, is like this. So the youngest member of their family has been taken by the monster, and they're basically convinced she's probably dead. So they attend this ceremony, honoring all the victims of this, essentially what's presented like a natural disaster. There's a shrine to her, and it's basically they all end up, they go on to pay their respects, but they all end up rolling on the floor, arguing with each other and squabbling, just even at this kind of should be like quite a serene kind of austere kind of moment. They just can't help themselves. Like her uncle just comes out and just slams a bottle of soju, I think, down on the shrine, just as like a drunken rant to a picture.
And again, The Host is one of those ones where you'd go, oh, it's a monster movie, so there should be lots of horror in it. And there are the moments of that and the moments of tension and things like that and sneaking around kind of the monster's lair. But it's also kind of got an awful lot of comedy in it and just kind of almost general silliness. This was kind of one of South Korea's first kind of big monster movies in a way. So they kind of just went, there is a certain thing when you have a monster movie, you do want to have a bit of extravagance, a bit of
And one of the rare instances which disproves the rule that was set up by Jaws, you don't show the monster, but in Host, on the contrary, they show it right out in the open, broad daylight, basically the first time you see it.
Well, I mean, Godzilla -1 does that as well, which took me completely by surprise when I saw it. I'm like, oh my god, it's 3 minutes in, we've got a full Godzilla. What's going on? But I think if this is one of your kind of country's first big budget monster movies, probably one of the things you're doing is they're going, yeah, can we show it off to show what we can do as an industry?
That's true. And he noticeably used got the same visual effects team back for Mickey 17 to design his version of the Creepers. So,
and they designed Okja as well, the Super Pig.
I mean, he is a committed vegetarian and animal rights activist as Bong. You won't be surprised to hear.
No.
And I think he loves all living things. I think, and a bit like Guillermo del Toro, who's a very big fan and I think friend of Bong's. They're both very much lovers of monsters and would sooner side with and sympathise with the monster than they would with most people. I would suggest.
Well, they're both of them are the kind of the very rare directors that have come from non-English first language speaking countries and won big at the Oscars. It's very rare for those to become kind of household names in kind of even in a kind of slightly more generalized film world, because we have to, I think, detach ourselves at one point, because what we think are kind of obvious names really aren't, unless you are in a film circle. But I think even Guillermo del Toro, probably if you're a very casual person you haven't heard of, but if you get slightly into it, you've at least heard tangentially. And if you're not for somebody that's not come from an English speaking kind of country to start with, aka the US, the UK, sometimes Australia or South America or Canada, essentially, to be able to make it big like that, they probably would be good friends, because they'd probably find kindred spirits in a way with each other, and both fans of Hitchcock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I would say like Memories of Murder and Parasite probably is two best kind of objectively kind of best kind of films. I think if you're not familiar with his work at all, maybe start with The Host. I think that's a good kind of entry point to his filmography, because I think it kind of it's an easy, very enjoyable watch, and I think it gets across his kind of unique tone and worldview quite neatly as well.
It's got the fun, it's got bits of suspense, it's got the kind of blockbuster scale that you'll see in some of his later films. It has a little bit of everything. I don't think it's 100% mashed together as well as some of his other films are. But I'll probably say that in general, the quality of his films are better if he's making them in his own tongue. Perhaps Barking Dogs Don't Bite aside, because he was kind of getting to grips with film as a medium, and even then you can still see that there is some talent there, and there's a distinct auteurial vision as we wash our mouth out whilst using the word auteur. It's definitely there, but one of the things I was watching with Mickey 17, as much as I enjoyed it, I'm like, please, in the nicest way, do not do another film not in your own native tongue. There is a difference in the way that he shoots and the way that it's written and the way and everything like that. And I think one of the reasons that The Host is so good is that you can see everything there, and he manages to get it across in exactly the way that he wants, as much as you can.
I find it interesting when he does press in the West. He speaks for a translator, not because he can't speak English, but because he doesn't want. He said he doesn't want the nuance of what he's saying to be lost in translation. You see, so he prefer if kind of a fluent English speaker would kind of relay exactly what he's saying. I find it interesting that when he does the films he has done with a large amount of English language, he doesn't tend to have I think he might have done for Snowpiercer, but for Okja and for Mickey, he doesn't have a co-screenwriter. He seems to do the English screenplay by himself.
Okja did have a co-screenwriter.
So Mickey,
because the co-screenwriter, I looked this up earlier. You'll never guess where the co-screenwriter John Ronson. You'll never guess where he's from.
God.
He's born in Cardiff. He's Welsh. The irony.
So I don't know whether it's a bit in terms of whether he misses some of that nuance, when he's just writing straight into a script into English. I'm sure obviously his English would be far better than my Korean, but
Yeah,
yeah, so there is something about being on home turf and writing about those kind of those ideas and those themes, that really kind of hit hard for kind of your
yeah,
kind of people speaking your native tongue.
yeah. And
Um,
I also, yeah,
so
I'll
so
get
so
to
he,
my point when I get to Snowpiercer.
yeah. So he stayed in Korea again for his fourth film, which was Mother. Um, Interestingly, just doing a bit of general reading around this, the Korean title, Madeo, apparently phonetically sounds very similar to so it's Korean for mother, but it's also phonetically very similar to the Korean for murder. So there's two very kind of equally applicable kind of views of what this film actually is about. I mean, this is definitely his. This is a tribute to Hitchcock, I think. Really, I
Yeah,
think it's very Hitchcockian this film for me. So it's an elderly single mother and her adult son with learning difficulties, basically their relationship, and he's accused of murdering like a local teenager, and it's basically her efforts to clear his name, and she goes to some quite dark and morally dubious places in order to do that.
yeah. Well, it is
Uh,
a wrong man
yeah,
film in essence.
yeah,
So kind
yeah,
of, and
yeah,
that was one of Hitchcock's favorite tropes. I mean, other than
yeah,
the film The Wrong Man,
yeah,
North by Northwest has it.
yeah,
Murder has it back in 31 slash Mary. Um, and there are others that I'm trying to think
yeah,
of that I will come
yeah,
up with at some point.
yeah. I mean, the casting for this is genius. So Kim Hee Ja, she's apparently a really big TV uh, Korean actress on TV. Apparently, she's best known roles. She's done several TV series, but she basically plays the archetypal kind of Korean mother. Basically, she's like everyone in Korea's mum.
Yeah,
Like how Americans, everyone thinks Tom Hanks is their dad or granddad. It's
yeah,
like she's like the Korean equivalent of that, basically. So it was, and he kind of had this idea around, I think before Host, actually. I think on
mhm,
Back of Memories of Murder, he had this idea for a story, and he said basically, right, I'm not going to do it unless I can get her in for this, because I'm going to be a really interesting
mm,
um, kind of 364 in terms of kind of her persona. And she kind of held back on it for years because she wasn't sure. She saw a couple of early versions of scripts, and she told him she was interested, but she said, "I don't have the script's quite there yet. If you want to go away, work on it a bit, and come back to me."
yeah,
And eventually, he ended up doing that, obviously after the Host. And yeah, it really makes. She's got to go through a real emotional journey with this, and she's got to,
yeah,
demonstrate so many different kind of facets of that character.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I
it's,
watched this for the second time earlier today. I'd seen
yeah,
this was one of the ones I'd seen. This might have been the second Bong Joon-ho film I saw. I think I saw Snowpiercer sort of maybe it was
mm,
pre-pandemic, so maybe sort of
yeah,
2017, 18, and not
yeah,
realized who it was because it's
yeah,
the first one. And
yeah,
unless you're up on your Korean film,
mm,
realistically, before Parasite came out and hit the Oscars, you're not really aware of who the guy is.
yeah,
And then when Parasite was kicking around, I think they had Mother on Mubi. I think they had the host
mm,
on movie as well, but I caught the host later and they had Mother. So this was like the second one I'd seen. And
yeah,
I didn't remember that much other than there was a kind of behind the house in the dark setting. And there was a couple of shots with her kind of overlooking what is eventually, I think it's the graveyard,
mm,
isn't it? The big kind of
yeah,
meadow field
yeah,
thing. And that was about all I
yeah,
remembered of the film.
yeah,
And watching it back,
yeah.
there's a lot of stuff there, and it is quite dark. I don't think it's as poised as Memories of Murder,
No,
um, but it does have some really dark moments and
there's some
kind of
dark places, yeah.
yeah,
And it's got this interesting conceit of, obviously, the son, having learning difficulties. But he also has like like short term memory comes and goes, doesn't it?
yeah,
And so essentially, it's a bit like something like Memento, I suppose. It's like the idea of this unreliable narrator, or like this key. Obviously, she's the main character, but when he comes and goes, when she goes to visit him in prison, his memories of things come and go, but you don't know for sure kind of what he's actually relaying is true, and then the next time he'll say something that's a completely different kind of perspective, and it's like you're trying to work out which stream of information to actually believe and kind of how far to take it. So
As I think about it, Sam, you've now seen Blackmail, haven't you? The Hitchcock film.
yes.
Yes. I'm thinking of the kind of ending of this and the ending of Blackmail, where it is good, but the main characters have done stuff which is
Yes.
incriminating, which they keep secret. So you kind of have this almost like not true catharsis right at the end. And it leaves you a very uncomfortable situation watching it because you're like, well, everything is kind of settled and resolved, but nobody is innocent in this.
No, there's that lingering kind of it's like uncomfortable nature of everything, isn't it? It's almost like it would have been better if they hadn't succeeded in what they're aiming to do, and kind of I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
It's almost they do dark things to try and solve the situation, and the
yeah,
situation solves itself
yeah.
in another way.
Yeah. I mean, this is one where I'm not actually going to reveal the final couple of twists to this, because I
Yeah,
think it generally does benefit to you if you just see it the first time, just don't know much about the second half of it, 'cause it goes some
yeah,
really interesting places. But God, there's some dark stuff in this. I mean, there's like, teenagers, selling themselves and stuff like that, and abuse, kind of intentional and unintentional, and there's some really nice stuff in this. And
Do you think this might be his darkest film, Mother?
yeah, I'd go with that. Yeah,
It's going to be either this or Memories, and
it,
I think this varies.
yeah,
I think Memories might be slightly more because of the ending. Might I'm going to use the term abyssal
yeah,
in terms of a kind of emptiness of hope or anything like that. But this is specifically dark in a human way, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. I get that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, there's even like not quite body horror, but kind of there's lots of references, to like blood and bodily fluids and stuff. Obviously, the key like plot points at times, but I think the scene where she's trying to keep an eye on him in the street, and that she's slicing up these roots, that she sells for like a kind of
yeah,
aromatherapy kind of stuff, and her fingers getting closer and closer to the guillotine, and like something's gonna be cut,
yeah,
and it's just it's kind of, that scene is almost reminding me more of like a Park Chan Wook kind of thing. It's like
yeah.
that wouldn't be out of place in like one of his vengeance films, I don't think. But
It's so metaphorical.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Speak.
so
You were about to say, speaking of Park Chan Wook, I was going to say, as I was, if we're moving on to Snowpiercer, when
mm,
somebody goes, "Hey, this Korean filmmaker's doing a lot, so let's do what we always do and bring him over to the US, and hope that we don't have what we have with a lot of kind of Asian filmmakers. When we bring them over, they do one film, it doesn't do very well, and they never make a US film again." Looking at
yeah.
you, was it Blueberry Nights for Park Chan
Oh,
Wook?
that was that was for Wong Kar-wai.
That was
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
yeah.
But like with again with Korean filmmakers comes to the West. Kim Ji-woon did The Last Stand with Arnie and hasn't really set foot in Hollywood again after
Yeah.
that. So he
And
thanked
again, I
for
think,
that career.
and again, I think a lot of it is in the fact that it's going to be your if you're in charge of the script as well, it's not your first language. There's going to be some subtlety lost,
Yeah,
which is inherent in a
yeah,
Korean film. This is one of the things I was thinking of when I was watching Mickey 17, that in a weird way, you could tell it was an American film
yeah,
because this is again a generalization, but in terms of its political stuff, there's a lot more of a sledgehammer approach.
yeah,
And part of that will be, I think, especially if it's a non-Anglophonic first language writer and director,
yeah,
some of the subtlety that you'd put into your own
yeah,
language,
yeah.
you're not as
I,
familiar
I
with
mean,
in that tongue, so you're
I mean,
going
I
to
mean,
do it in a more obvious fashion.
you can definitely tell that this is his most troubled production, and a bit like Guillermo del Toro's first Hollywood film, Mimic.
Yeah,
He said that was the most miserable time he'd ever had as a filmmaker, because he just constantly clashing with studio execs and kind of demanded they cut stuff and add stuff, and it just wasn't his vision by the time he came out the other side.
and
I
with
think
this one, it was clashing with
it's
Weinstein.
with the Weinsteins, yeah, and he really had to fight. I mean, it's in his contract now. Every film after he didn't get final cut on Snowpiercer, but every subsequent film he has demanded final cut in his contracts.
Yeah.
He really had to fight for a couple of the more subtle kind of, again, metaphorical kind of scenes. He had to make up some bullshit about why it was so important to him. And
What was the scene he made up about a fisherman?
Fisherman, yeah. It was one of the monologues. I think Song Kang-ho's character
once
has.
again returning to Bong Joon-ho.
Yeah. Most speak in Korean, but with like a handy English translator for the.
It's sci-fi. You can do that,
at the back. Which interesting. I've just remembered he brought that back for Mickey, didn't he? The handy sci-fi translator coming out for the final.
Look, it's a Babel fish. You have to do it. But there's the story that kind of one of the monologues was about it's growing up as a fisherman or something like that, or the taste of fish. I can't remember exactly what it is. And Weinstein wanted to cut it out.
Wanted to cut it, yeah.
And so Bong Joon-ho made up a story that his father had been a fisherman, and therefore it resonated with him on a family level and something like that. And he was like, "Oh," and Weinstein was like, "Oh yes, family is very important to me. You can keep it." And it was like, "Is your father actually a fisherman?" And Bong Joon was like, "No." Absolutely not.
He came from a very middle class background. Both his parents were teachers.
Just like, is your father? No, I made it up to keep it. But it's interesting as saying that kind of both he's drawing on influences from earlier films, and also that kind of larger budget Korean filmmakers are a fairly tight knit community, because there's one scene in this for anyone that doesn't know, it's essentially social capitalism on a train, essentially. And you work your way from the lower end all the way to the front.
So it's based on a French graphic novel, I think.
I believe so. And one of the co-writers for this, whose name I will get up now. So it was based on a French graphic novel called Les Transperceneges, something along those lines. The Transport, I think it is, by Jacques Loeb, Benjamin Legrand, and Jean-Marc Rochette. But it was written, the screenplay, by Bong Joon-ho and Kelly Masterton. Now, Kelly Masterton has written, probably most famous for one of the films, his film that he did before this, which is Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Which had a number of people in it, including Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was probably Philip Seymour Hoffman, Ethan Hawke's in it, Marissa Tomei, Albert Finney is in it. Now, my connection through all of this is that one of the producers on Before the Devil Knows You're Dead was Hannah Leader, who is best mates with my lecturer, Hugh Fennoff Jones. They do loads of stuff together, and was one of the producers on My Happy Ending, which I worked on. So I've got like a 3 steps of separation to Bong Joon-ho through the screenwriter and producer. So theoretically, I could send a couple of emails round to try and get on a Bong Joon-ho production. Who knows? Maybe I should have thought of that earlier. But that's not the point I wanted to bring up. My point was that the tight-knit community and getting influences from each other, as much as perhaps The Wailing got influence from Memories of Murder, there's a certain scene in this where there's a train fight, and it's shot side on with a long tracking shot like that,
it's very much a Park Chan-wook tribute.
Very much Old Boy, yes. And then obviously 3 years later, you have Train to Busan, and there's a couple of shots in there which is very much side-on train fight. This is all kind of filtering together now. Korea very much likes its almost video game style side-on.
So of course, as his first Hollywood film, it's got to have a big Hollywood cast, hasn't it? And it's got quite a cast.
I was going to say it is slightly ridiculous. You do look at it and go, "Oh my god, how many people are in this?" Although one of the great things is that obviously this is his first of 2 films, and I hope it isn't the last one with Tilda Swinton.
Yeah,
because
I think they do vibe off each other pretty well, so I'm sure they work together.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all if she was offered Toni Collette's role in Mickey 17 and she probably couldn't do it because of scheduling.
Yeah. To be honest, she was probably offered Mark Ruffalo's role as well. Robert Pattinson's role, anything. Just give Tilda Swinton everything. Like, as I said, I haven't seen her do a bad performance.
But so we got Chris Evans, we've got Jamie Bell, we've got John Hurt, Ed Harris, Tilda Swinton, and
Octavia Spencer.
Octave Spencer and obviously Song Kang-ho in there to round out the cast, because he's
Yeah.
got to have his good luck charm in there.
Yeah. And I will say that you've also got Go Ah Sung as well coming back, and she was originally in The Host.
Yeah, Hun Seo in The Host, yeah.
Yeah. And it's essentially it is capitalism on a train. There's a revolt right at the end where they've been eating these protein blocks and they're going to work their way to the front because essentially they're on a train that orbits the Earth every year because global cooling. We need a reason to have all these people on the train.
I think it was like to stop climate change. They dropped like an ice bomb or something, which basically plunged the planet into a new ice age.
We don't know
like
who
that.
struck first, but we know it was us that did that to the sun. Essentially. And so now they're on the big, massive movie train. And if they go outside, we'll all freeze and die. Is the song that the kids sing. And so Chris Evans starts a revolt along with John Hurt and Octavia Spencer, and they're going to fight their way to the front. And Tilda Swinton and her goons, who's working for Ed Harris, who's kind of the creator of the locomotive and the train, they're trying to stop them because everyone has to have their ordained place in the social order, obviously, and it's a balanced ecosystem, a closed ecosystem, and everyone has to, everything has to be maintained in the correct position. And so they're going to fight their way to the front.
Oh, it's got Ewan Bremner in as well, hasn't it? Spud from Trainspotting.
And it's quite funny. They Bong Joon-ho. There's an interview where he goes I think he described John Hurt as the greatest living actor, which, considering he's working with Song Kang-ho for the third time, it's like, hey, excuse me, I'm your best mate. Why are you saying it's John Hurt? But then there's also a thing that John Hurt kind of essentially signed on because he wanted to work with Bong Joon-ho. Same with Chris Evans. Apparently, Chris Evans didn't really get the script 100% to begin with, even though I think it's I think it's not that he didn't get the point of it. He didn't get the entire logistics. And I'm like, the logistics don't make sense.
And this was probably like the last film he did, like before he was properly like in the Marvel fold. He obviously done one Captain America film at this point.
He'd done Avengers.
But in terms of like him being a megastar, I think it was still very much probably took a couple more films for him. I mean, he may have shot. I'm not sure exactly when this film was shot. I mean, obviously, with the Weinsteins getting involved, I don't know whether it was delayed again, but. I'm not sure what kind of how the timeline works, because pre-Marvel he obviously did Sunshine with Danny Boyle, and then he did this kind of, and it's just weird looking back on any sci-fi film, with like the Marvel stuff to one side, thinking this was like, it's very hard not to think of him as Captain America in these other roles.
It is. You do look at it as like, what are you doing here, Captain America? There's some interesting moments, and there's some bits where obviously. Being a film with a Korean director, if it's not your first film, you have to try and hit the 2-hour mark. Barking Dogs Don't Bite is the only one of his that is just under 2 hours.
To be honest, I would say that, I think all of his films, even if they're on the longer side, they're I think the max 2 hours 10, 2 hours 15, which is pretty short as far as Korean films go.
Normally Korean films are like 2 hours 30, 2 hours 40 if you can get it. Again, that's when you're getting the bonuses up. I still maintain this is a thing. And there's some interesting things, because obviously something like this, it's essentially we're moving up through a train. How do you keep that going for 2 hours? Essentially, is your issue. Essentially, so you have to. There's some interesting things. I think possibly the most inventive thing they came up with is the shootout where it goes around the train goes around the corner. And they have a shoot from the two different aspects through the windows.
Because one side of the train's going that way, and the other side of the train's coming back on it. It's kind of interesting. Yeah.
The one thing I don't understand is there must be other walkways though, because otherwise, like, one, I don't think at any point do you see kind of general housing.
No.
And two, like, if there's general housing kind of nearer the front of the train, and it's kind of class based off, and the richer people at the front and the poorer people at the back, because aside from just like Chris Evans's lot right at the rear of the train, there seems to be no differentiation. going
No.
forward. And I want to know, like, because one of the first places they get to is the classroom with sort of
Yeah.
12,
Yeah.
13 kids there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if there's accommodation nearer the front of the train, you have to take the kids through a nightclub with
Yeah.
drugs and sex going on. Like, how does that work? So I
Yeah.
don't know if there is like another walkway somewhere
Mm.
that they don't use for some reason. Like,
Yeah.
apparently this is why they got 4 series out of this for another show afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I've never seen the Netflix series
I haven't.
based on this, but I mean, I think it's gone down quite well. I think it's meant to be decent. But
Yeah,
just something I've never looked into really.
yeah. And I mean, I know there's only 2 hours that you have to try
Yeah,
and get whole revolutions,
yeah,
political satire, and everything like that thrown in.
yeah,
But there are some logistical stuff that I'm wondering, going, how does this work? And maybe it's actually there is a 2 hours 40 cut of this, and the
yeah,
Weinstein's chopped it down, and now some of the stuff you go, how, what, hey, what? This is
yeah,
weird.
yeah. I mean, obviously, Tilda gets that great monologue, about but the fine balance, and the reason the caste system's the way it is, and know your place and everything. I mean, I find it fascinating that kind of in terms of the way she looked. I mean, she must have had just so much. Obviously, we know she suggested the voice, but in terms of
Yeah.
her look and everything, I wonder how much she contributes to that. Because essentially, it comes out that she looks a bit like Margaret Thatcher, but she sounds like Arthur Scargill. It's like this kind
Yeah,
of
I would agree with that.
this mesh of like the miners' crisis in the 80s. Like take both sides of the argument, put it in one person, and make all kinds of horrible. It's kind of an interesting
Well, I
kind
mean,
of concept.
that sounds like Bong Joon-ho right there. Let's take both sides of the
Yeah,
argument, mash it together, and see how corrupt
yeah,
a system we can get.
yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it's gained kind of more appreciation as time's gone on.
I mean, in the UK, we had to wait an extra year to see this because of the bloody Weinsteins. They just messed around with the kind of the distribution rights, and it. So I think it went. I think it had a limited theatrical release in the States, then went to Netflix, but we didn't get it
Yeah.
for like over a year. I think I had to order like a European Blu-ray, I think, to see it. And then eventually, like about a year and a half later, it finally came to streaming. But yeah, just some
Yeah.
Weinsteins for you.
Yep, yep. I think most things in cinema can be solved with that's the Weinsteins for you. Uh,
Yeah.
and and I can't see anything
Yeah,
else
I
past
mean,
that.
a lot of it came down that the clashes came down to the Weinsteins going, I don't think the general American audience will understand this. Can you make it a bit clearer? And Bong was like, no.
Yeah.
If they're paying
And
attention, they'll get it.
yeah, and it's there are parts where it is slightly in your face. I mean, the entire film is fairly obvious what is
Yeah,
going on.
yeah,
It's like if you've seen any film where they symbolize a kind of hierarchical class capitalist structure in a building of some kind, you don't have to do much else to understand the principle. Like we've done it. We did The King and the Mockingbird for an animations episode. You look at the bathhouse, Spirited Away, picture pretty much anything along those lines, you have
yeah.
it here. And he will obviously revisit the same basic principle in Parasite as well.
Yes.
And trying to get anything else past that, I don't know what the Weinsteins are thinking when they're like, this is too complex.
Mm,
Like, as soon as you get the basic principle, anything else under that just becomes easy to understand
yeah.
because you've got such a solid grounding that you kind of don't think about it, and the main political point is kind of established fairly subconsciously, so all your efforts can go to understanding any subtlety. So why they were like, can you make this simpler for American
Mm,
audiences? It's already, in the nicest way, bloody simple. I
yeah.
don't think you have to
Yeah.
be somebody
And,
with
and,
degrees in literary
Yeah,
criticism
and
to
give Bond
understand.
some credit. His kind of class parable. It's not like a Ken Loach film. I mean, he's a big fan of Ken Loach and Mike Leigh. Apparently, he likes
Yeah,
those films. But the way he'll deliver the same kind of message will be usually in a very entertaining kind of genre kind of inflected
yeah,
package, won't it? You couldn't get an easier entry point to films about these kind of quite heavy themes. It's
yeah.
he's going pretty easy on you, in terms of articulating this debate, I'd say.
Yeah, and he will maintain this going forward for the next 2, 3 films.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing.
So he did another American Korea co-production expert, but
Yeah,
most of the money came from Netflix. It ended up on the Netflix platform,
yeah,
and that was Okja, his big
yeah.
animal rights kind of thesis, essentially.
I was going to say you're not allowed to spoil the ending because I've seen 3/4 of the
That's fine.
film.
Yeah,
Uh,
but essentially it's ET, but the kid is friends and trying to protect a pig rather than an alien,
yeah,
like a bioengineered super pig. And it's a
yeah,
very cute Studio Ghibli esque kind of CG creation.
yep. And the I don't know what more we want. We need to say, like, that's pretty much it. It's
Yeah,
ET, but
yeah,
the
yeah,
Americans kind of kidnap a big
yeah.
South Korean super pig.
Yeah, and again, Tilda's in this again as another kind of cartoon character, or pair of cartoon characters, really a pair of CEOs, like a pharmaceutical company. Um,
Yeah,
it's not. I think it's the second time she's played twins. Actually, she played twins in Hail Caesar for the Coens as well. So,
yeah. I mean, the amount of people in this
mm.
is
Jake,
ridiculous.
like Jake Gyllenhaal,
Giancarlo Esposito is in
Stephen
it.
Yeun.
Paul Dano.
Yeah,
Like it's there's some big people in there, and apparently Jake Gyllenhaal is just like
yeah,
was a fan of his anyway.
yeah. Jake Gyllenhaal basically playing like Steve Irwin from Hell, basically.
Yeah,
It's just
and
he's like this.
apparently he kind of yeah, Bong Joon-ho had got a thing, and Jake Gyllenhaal's like, can I be in it in some way? Can I have a part somewhere? Do you have a part for me? It's just like, well, we can see, and it's just like, I don't care what it is. I just want to work with Bong Joon-ho. And again, this is before he wins the Oscars for Parasite and everything like that.
Yeah,
So I mean, he's done one US film, and for well regarded but still kind of Korean cinema. So unless you're kind of up on your Korean cinema, and a lot of these actors are doing, at least when they're on doing the film sets, they're working very long days, and even if they're not doing that, they've got a lot of line writing, they're a lot of
yeah,
sinking down into these things. It's not just that they turn up on set and read their lines,
yeah,
as much as they're overpaid a lot of the time, let's be honest, throwing
mm,
millions at it for no reason that we could save.
yeah,
It's not like they have all the time in the world. So to actually go and seek these films out, you do kind of have to go looking for them. So to be aware of this filmmaker that is, yes, well regarded, but has done one American film and is mostly in Korea, to
yeah,
go, I don't care what it is, I want to be in your film, is a statement and testament to how a lot of even kind of big Hollywood films see Bong Joon-ho. Even at this point, he'd done 5 films.
mm,
This is not a lot of films over the period. When you get to sort of 12, 13, you've kind of got the
yeah.
kudos. It's an interesting film, probably along with Barking Dogs Don't Bite, his least well known.
Mm. Yeah, and to an extent, possibly his least successful. I mean, I like Doctor. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure if it's the whole metaphor quite kind of comes across as strong as some of his other kind of more satirical
Yeah,
kind of pieces. But yeah, it's good. It's enjoyable. And then next, obviously, yeah, you have the big one. You have Parasite, the one that broke the glass ceiling. That's about where he helped international audiences overcome that 1 inch barrier, the
yeah.
subtitle. Still one, I
And
think is it the most profitable South Korean film in the West, I think, at this point.
possibly, I
uh,
think it was made for like 11 million and made
it's
something
it,
like
it's
two
it's
hundred
it,
and fifty
it's
million
probably
dollars,
between this and Train to Busan. I'm not sure which is more profitable, but yeah,
possibly. Yeah.
it'll be one or the other. But
And
yeah,
this,
and
I just want to say, this also proves the thing that everyone's going on now after Anora's won, that like, oh, this is the triumph that independent film needed, and I don't know quite what they're thinking. I think that's purely as a response to Oppenheimer. But I went
mm,
back for the last 20, 25 years to about the year 2000 and
yeah,
looked at the average budgets of
yeah,
those films, and it's kind of Oppenheimer's obviously Oppenheimer. They gave Christopher Nolan pretty much everything. Then it's kind of Return of the King has the
yeah,
most, but even Return of the King, they essentially shot all three films for
That
about
budget was
200
split out of the trilogy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was for about it was something like 80, 85 mil each. And again, this is not adjusting for inflation, but still, And then after that, it's kind of Argo at 50 mil,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
around there. So
Yeah,
even if you, even if
most of that would have gone on its ensemble cast, wouldn't it?
yeah, most of them, I was kind of looking at kind of your ballpark for a Best Picture winner the last 25 years, and I would say around half of them at least are around the 20 mil mark. And you look at them and you go, okay, Oppenheimer, big, but then you go, Everything Everywhere All at Once, what's that? 10 mil. Nomadland, what's that? Like 3 mil. Parasite, 11 mil. Something like Moonlight, pretty much nothing. There's so many films that got made for essentially nothing. And apparently suddenly Anora is the big win. It's like, let's be honest, the big picture winners like Oppenheimer and Return of the King are kind of the oddballs.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
big pictures don't normally get the noms. It's the smaller ones that the art house. Oh, this is true cinema.
Yeah, I find it interesting
Sorry,
I find it interesting that Parasite and Anora were the third and the fourth films, respectively, in the history of the Oscars to go on from winning the Palme d'Or to winning Best Picture. It doesn't happen very often. I think,
No.
like before those two, I think it's back in the 50s, like the last time that happened.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that, and that's because 70 to 75% of the things that win Palme d'Or aren't in the English language, and we know that the Oscars very much hate to even nominate things that aren't in the English language, but stuff that isn't in. Not in the English language or kind of the shorts.
Yeah, I mean, I did a piece for the Film Magazine. So as of a couple of years ago, I think it was 11 in the history of the Oscars. 11 films in the history of the Oscars been nominated for Best Picture that weren't in English.
Yeah, and now there's might be another 3.
Yeah, another 3 on top. Yeah.
But even then, it's kind of outside of that category. You think of things like Best Actor, even when Parasite won. There wasn't a Best Actor or Best Actress or score or anything like that. It was very much the technical, essentially, picture, director, writing, and then international feature.
Yeah. What's interesting about Parasite is, in terms of, obviously everyone remembers all the awards that Bong himself got, various award ceremonies around the world. But this was one of the few instances where in the West, a lot of bodies were also awarding the cast. Generally, Asian actors don't get acting noms. And this is, it's almost like, I'm not saying they're all racist, but it's almost like unconscious bias in terms of I've seen a few papers about this kind of. It's almost like the Western audiences in terms of like reading emotions on like people of other ethnicities and stuff like that. It's like a general kind of body language and stuff like that. It's almost like another kind of barrier to overcome in addition to like subtitles and stuff. But I was so pleased to see like Song Kang-ho gets a few nods for this, and then like just the following year, for Corrida for Broker, he finally got Best Actor at Cannes. Just the following year from this. So, he is finally getting those well overdue recognition. I think for his
and I mean
how versatile he is.
Yeah, and I mean I don't know which the kind of Asian awards it got, but I'm guessing kind of. For most of them as well, we think the Oscars are the biggest, film awards in the world, and that's only because we kind of grow up in a kind of an Anglosphere, and the import and the export of. I mean, I've heard it described that essentially Hollywood is essentially just cultural colonialism.
Yes,
and that is it. But probably most kind of again. Asian filmmakers as a very generic, probably slightly offensive bracket, but let's just do it because I don't have another phrase on the tip of my tongue. They probably don't care about the Oscars. I mean, if they do it, great, but thereafter, what is it, like the Golden Dragon or the Golden Bears or whatever it is, the kind of Asian film awards. I mean, even Bong Joon-ho essentially went like, the Oscars are a very local ceremony. It's kind of within our club kind of thing. So they're like, if we get in, yes, and it's an honor to win any awards. But realistically, it's like the dragons and those kinds of things. That's what the ones that are really important to us, because that's essentially 90% of the market for kind of Korean cinema, for Japanese cinema, for Chinese cinema, Vietnam, Hong Kong, or there, is in Asia because
Mm.
the ethnicity is similar. Perhaps if it may be that a lot of the languages there's some people living in Japan have come from China and vice versa,
Yeah,
so there's less
yeah,
of a
yeah, yeah.
language
No, in terms of
barrier as well.
ethnicities, language, and cultural touchstones, there is a lot of crossover because over the
Yeah.
centuries, kind of groups have moved from one place to another and vice versa, and
A bit like
place.
if you're living in mainland Europe somewhere like I don't know
Yeah,
Luxembourg or Austria or something like that, you'll probably have most people have at least two, if not three or four different
yeah,
languages just naturally
yeah,
because the movement of people is so vast. So it's probably, yes, it won the Oscars, and we think this is the big award, but
yeah,
probably for 90% of
yeah,
the kind of I'm going to say people like Toho and Showbox
yeah,
and all of the production companies in places like
mm,
Korea and Taiwan and Japan and China,
mm,
yes, that's great, but the ones that they're actually focused on are
yeah,
kind of the ones within the big awards within
yeah,
an Asian market.
yeah,
So
definitely,
winning the Oscars
definitely, yeah,
sounds amazing, but it
yeah,
probably isn't as much a deal
mm, yeah.
to those companies.
Yeah, yeah. Now, a lot of people kind of look at kind of the best picture winners at the Oscars, and I think, oh, they'll all be a drag. They'll be really kind of worthy and depressing, and just hard work essentially. But
Make a
this
Holocaust
very,
movie.
but this very much isn't that. I mean, obviously, yeah. Again, it's very dark, very twisted at times. Goes to some really kind of emotionally heightened kind of places, but it's a thriller at the end of the day.
Yeah,
It's a thriller and it's a black comedy and it's a suspense film and it's just a really good watch. I mean,
yeah,
I'd happily sit down and watch this again anytime. I think
yeah. It's
it's just
almost
so,
like
so good.
it's oh yes, a situational comedy, but it's almost a
Mm.
situational thriller
Yeah,
where
because
it's
we've seen that so many times in like sitcoms, especially like you're pretending to be something you're not, and you're trying making every effort not to be found out
yeah.
about that, to be caught in the lie. But there's
There's
like
almost
so much
the
more,
kind
so
of
much more riding on it, and it's almost like the poor family masquerading as to get in with this rich family, but also the rich family have got their own thing going on. They're really hiding what they're
yeah.
about, kind of. So it's that push and pull, that kind of
It's
power
almost
dynamic
like
that's
a
really
kind of
interesting.
suspense of not secondhand embarrassment, but you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
That
yeah,
kind of thing. And again, I think Parasite is another perfect example of how again being very kind of general stereotype of Korean filmmakers. Again, the
yeah,
ones that I've seen, which are normally the better ones that get exported over to here, they manage to somehow combine all kind of tones in one and it
yeah.
not feel out of place. How many US filmmakers or UK filmmakers, Canadian, kind of that, manage to do that on a consistent basis? It's ridiculous. And
Yeah,
you pretty much never again see of the kind of crime thrillers, the black comedy, those stuff that we get kind of exposed to over here in the West.
mm,
You almost never see one of these films without kind of moments of organic comedy, almost human comedy sprinkled in. You never get these films where it's like completely 100% black the entire way through.
yeah,
Something like Ari Aster's first two films. Again,
yeah,
I'm not going to go on my rant, but again, just the tone of kind of both of those very much have a very bleak tone, pretty much from the word go, and kind of don't let it up.
yeah.
Even something like The Witch,
Mm,
where are the elements of comedy in that? It's very bleak. Bong Joon-ho, I don't think would ever think to do that.
no,
Um, and I think perhaps that's coming from maybe a Hitchcock background.
yeah.
Even his darkest films like Psycho still have their odd kind of humorous moments,
I've seen it. Yeah,
little moments in there sprinkled
yeah.
in between.
It's like you treat the kind of serious subject with kind of respect, but you also acknowledge it. It's like the idea of you laughing at a funeral. It's like there is
Yeah,
always a funny moment. People are weird and they react strangely to kind of intense situations.
yeah.
And there's always humor in that.
And I think that normally it's weird because they manage to get all these kind of tonal shifts in. And Bong Joon-ho, again, I think Parasite is a perfect example where it literally flip from thriller to black comedy to horror to political satire within seconds. And I think that's much more reflective of life, that life has no set tone. So your emotions will flip from one moment to the other. And, you know, you can go from abject misery 1 second and you wake up the next day and that's all gone and you've got a completely different outlook on life. And a day is so long that you get at the end and you could go through so many emotions in that just organically is the way that life unfolds. And I don't know whether there's a thing there in just the way that different nations structure the tonal kind of shift in the way they write stuff. It might be an interesting thing for me to look into when I have no time, of just the kind of structure of where you shift from comedy to things like that and how they manage to do that. Maybe I should do that at some point.
Yeah.
That'll be the second cut article coming in 3 years' time, and it will have wild tonal shifts in it.
You heard it here first. Yeah. So, and as we already mentioned, obviously on the back of this, he had a bit of time off, and came back with Mickey 17, which we've both seen. I think we both really enjoyed.
Yeah, I
And
don't think we want to go into it too much because it's only just come out.
No, but its differences from the novel it's based on are kind of interesting, and they're not drawbacks. He doesn't stick to the letter of it, but he kind of uses it as a starting point and does his own thing. But there's, as you've mentioned in your piece, there's some interesting points of comparison and kind of taking the themes and running with them, in a different medium. It is interesting to discuss.
I was gonna say I was very happy to see a couple of bits in there that the same. Not as and I think I had to write that because I was kind of watching it, comparing it to the book. But I mean, I read the book as well for a paper presentation that I did last year because I used it as one of my case studies to present that. So I got specific elements from that running in my head because I'd read it specifically to analyze the book. And it was on kind of identity in relation to cyberspace and ghostliness and things like that. So I was looking at it from that point of view, and Bong Joon-ho kind of takes bits of that, but focus much more on the kind of social structure and the exploitative kind of capitalist
which is what he does in his films. That's his go-to kind of way of exploring a story, really, isn't it?
Yeah, there are bits that I'm very upset on. The fact there's a particular bedroom scene that gets interrupted in this one. In the book, there's a comedic cutoff which suggests that it happens. And I mean, you've got Sam's review up there. I haven't put my views out specifically on the piece on the film yet because my analysis of it is analysis of the text rather than an opinion. One thing that I thought was watching it is I think it was the best he could have done in English. There are things in there that I didn't like the fact you have a 3-minute introduction and then 30 minutes of backstory, where it's just completely front loaded. And it means that essentially the main crux of the film is got to about 25-30 minutes in. In the novel, this is at the end of like chapter 1 or 2, and the chapters are only sort of 7-8 pages each. And essentially a lot of the backstory is filtered in through flashbacks on the way through. I don't know whose idea it was to essentially front load 30 minutes of backstory when I go, why don't you just take out the bit at the start, move it to later on, then there is no backstory. And the entire story starts right at the beginning, and it doesn't feel like, well, if you're not going to sprinkle it in, do it like that. So I had issues personally with that. I don't know, again, if maybe this is producers going, this is going to be weird. Can you make it simpler for an American audience? I don't know. And there were the themes that he was using and playing up in various ways through people like Mark Ruffalo, Tony Collette, and just the way that it is done, and certain parallels that are drawn between people. Again, I think it's the best he could have done, not in his own language. And it's still a very entertaining film. I think, Sam, I think I would have probably rated it about the same as you. I think it's the best of his 3 English language films. But I also think he's kind of got across the same ideas better in his own tongue. And I think this is the thing where I think perhaps somebody like Del Toro, who has now been working in English for so long, he's probably one of the people that can do that the best, because he's now done essentially more English language films than Spanish language films. With Bong Joon-ho, I know he said his next film is going to be a horror film set in a train station in Seoul, and I go, do that one, and then in the nicest way, please don't do another US film for ages, please, because you are much better in your own tongue, because it's more natural to you. You can get across your ideas in a subtler way without having to think through a language barrier. But this is going to be a problem.
I was also so upset that they squandered the potential of an extra 10 Mickeys, and we don't even get to see how they all died. It's referred to, but I thought that was the whole point, that we'd go for like a Tom Cruise in Edge of Tomorrow kind of thing. There'd be like a rapid fire montage
is it Tree in the first Happy Death Day that you have this bit where she just goes, let's just see how this happens, and she just kills herself in a montage like 20 times in 5 minutes. Different ways.
I was expecting something like that, but
just putting like a kind of carnival music over it in the background, and that was the other thing as well. By front loading all the exposition at the beginning, the actual kind of crux of the fact that there are multiple Mickeys running around, that is most of the book, whereas in this it's like half of it. Again, because he's working on different things, so I'm like, there are other things which have been expanded upon which make it interesting in a different direction, but there are some things which have been lost. I almost think he needed 2.5 hours.
Maybe,
I mean, it gets 2 hours 17, but I mean 2.5 hours of actual like footage.
Yeah, I mean, I do love it when they get Robert Pattinson just to be a weird little guy, because he does it so well. It's like when
he's been a weird little guy his entire career.
When he's not been a vampire or Batman, just every other kind of choice he's made in his career has been fascinating. I just love to
Tenet.
I just love to let him kind of have his freak fly, just proudly. It's.
I was going to say, it is a good film, and I highly recommend checking out Sam's review of it, obviously.
Yeah.
You may disagree.
Yeah.
You may think that the capitalistic themes are too overdone and unoriginal. As soon as it is dispensed with, we won't have to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. I think anyone comes out saying, "Oh, it's a cliche," or with yet another eat the rich kind of films. Like, well, as you say, when society is a bit more kind of equal and the oligarchies are fallen, then we can stop making message films like this. But until then, no, not for now. So I think we that's been kind of a whistle stop tour through his filmography, but obviously much more to come from him, I'm sure. And
I was going to say, which is your favorite Bong Joon-ho film, but I think we all know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, Bong Joon-ho and Guillermo del Toro, they kind of both vie for my favorite filmmakers of all time. But I would say Bong's. I think I've got to go with Memories of Murder. But I've probably got equal affection and more likely to rewatch The Host, because it's just so damn entertaining. So it's between those two for my favorite. How about you?
I think purely because it's the one I've seen the most, I'm going to be unoriginal and say Parasite. Because I'd seen Snowpiercer and I had seen Mother in passing, but kind of it was just a kind of, oh, this is the filmmaker that's won the thing. I saw Parasite and went, I actually physically can't fault this, and so that's the one that I've watched multiple times. And although probably Memories of Murder is a very close second, there are bits that I don't vibe with as much, but I also can't fault that. So then it's I can't fault either, and therefore it's just a personal taste at that point. And Parasite just.
Bear in mind, Parasite was only been out for 6 years, or not even that yet. 5.5 years. I'm sure I'll be watching it many more times. It may supplant the others, with more rewatches. I've still not seen the black and white version. Actually, I do have a copy of that. So that might be. Might be the next one on the list to revisit and see if that version of it is any difference.
I mean, I remember watching Parasite going, this is good, okay. And then the halfway twist comes in, where the shelving unit is moved, and I just kind of sat there and went, okay, this is doing a thing now, where the entire...
Cooking on gas now.
And thankfully, I'd managed to avoid any kind of spoilers.
I had no idea about it.
And so and normally again, for the film magazine years and years ago, I wrote a thing on what is a twist versus a reveal, and that is a reveal rather than a twist, I
Yeah.
think. But I get to that point, and it suddenly does the whole kind of rotation.
Yeah.
The entire thing goes upside down. And you go, oh, okay,
Mm.
okay. This is taken to, and I remember Tarantino. There's a thing with him saying that essentially America used to do story films and they don't do it anymore. Where he's complaining that you go to a film now, after 10 minutes you know the entire plot. Whereas what it used to be is that you'd have a scenario and it would unfold from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and it would take you down weird ways as it moved.
Yeah.
Parasite definitely does that. There is no way after 10 minutes to see exactly what is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing like that. Because
Yeah.
it just at that moment where kind of the reveal is made, suddenly it's a bit again like a thinking of Psycho again, knowing that was the film that started him off, where suddenly you go, okay, I now have no idea what's going to happen, you know, and it is a very rare thing to be able to pull it off. And I think looking back on it, I kind of thought about it afterwards. I remember thinking about it, going, it's such a weird reveal
Yeah.
and twist revelation. But when you watch it again, it feels like out of the blue the first time. But the second time you
Yes.
watch it, you go, this is the only way that this can work.
Yeah.
There is no logical other way you could have taken the story that is set
Mm.
up in the first act. And
Yeah.
that is incredibly difficult to do. To have something so out of the blue and yet you can't think of like another way in which you could have taken it. Because other films, you go, oh, I'd have maybe followed that character, or
Yeah.
maybe I would have done this. You go to
Mm.
Parasite, and once you know how it all unfolds, you go, there's no other natural way that it can go, and yet it's such
Yeah.
a complete switch. And it's I think that moment I just thought, okay, I get the guy now. I get it. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand the
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it for now for Bong Joon-ho. And well, yeah, I suppose that's it for this show. Until next time, when we'll be back talking about something else. Hopefully with Jacob again. Hopefully it'll be the three amigos again next time.
Yeah,
Uh,
maybe he'll remember that we're which day we're actually streaming this time.
yeah.
Instead of
Yeah,
setting it up and wandering off.
that'll teach me for rearranging the schedule anyway.
I mean, it
But
was me as well, but
yeah,
you mainly.
but until next time, you can find me at SSP Thinks Film, and on our Second Cut Pod Substack, where I've published my review of Mickey 17. Check that out. Back on the film magazine, which is our old home, I wrote quite a bit on Bong Joon-ho, so you can check out my reviews of Memories of Murder, of The Host. I did a ranking of all of his films. Obviously, that'll be prior to Mickey 17, but all 7 of his films at the time. And I also did a little essay on parasites and the symbolism of all the windows in the film. So you can check that one out as well.
Were they really metaphorical?
They were really metaphorical.
They're
Yeah,
so metaphorical.
it all means so much, man.
They rock.
Kieran, where can the people find you?
Hopefully nowhere. If you want to find me somewhere, I'm K Judgmental in the various places. I on the Substack as of today have an essay, our first essay that I had to make a new category for essays, and hopefully I'll put some on there. Attempted general academia kind of deep dives into the differences between Mickey 7, the original novel, and Mickey 17. On one viewing, so it may be that in months to come when I rewatch it, I may slightly tweak it, but I at least think that the general principles are there, even if I haven't got too many quotes because I couldn't remember them, obviously, from seeing it once. So yeah, please go and read that and support us. And if you want more kind of actual deep dives, vaguely faux academia things, then let us know, and when I can actually do some proper academia, I'll try and bring in. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should do an introduction to film studies kind of series.
Yeah, could do. It's definitely a possibility for the future.
who knows? And I'm sure Jacob will do stuff as well.
Yeah. But until then, you can find us on our Substack. Subscribe. If you like what you've read from us, and there should be stuff dropping into your inbox fairly regularly. So that's secondcutpod.substack.com, I believe.
Something along that lines.
Or you can email secondcutpod@gmail.com if you've just got any general comments for us. Like and share what we put out there, is there anything else we normally say at the end of these things?
Something, comment, rate, and subscribe. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
We'll have our own version.
Yeah. All right then. So that's about it for this week. We'll see you next time for another one. Goodbye.
Adios.
Right. Yes. Oh, I sat here the whole time. I saw how much my one message distracted you and decided to not send any more messages. But also, if I unmute on Zoom, it pops up and says Jesse Ferris is talking, so I just kept myself muted.